Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar. This is another webinar in the series that we've had for the last 3 years, co-hosted by the State Chamber and NJM Insurance Group. We've covered a lot of issues in the last couple of years, and cybersecurity, which is what we will tackle today, is kind of a must cover event because of the potential for getting customer information in the wrong hands. And we need to find out and pass on to all of you some potential ways that you can secure that information and prevent any kind of breach from happening. So there are a variety of steps that can be taken, and our panel of experts today, I think, will help identify some of those issues and potential paths that you might take to prevent that data from getting out. And we will get to that in a minute. But before we do, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat box, and we will get to as many of them as we can near the end of the hour. I want to thank NJM Insurance Group for continuing to partner with us on these series of webinars for small business. It's the third year, as I said, of doing this, and the series has been very well attended, and we've had a lot of participants and gotten a lot of great reviews on the series. NJM is a great corporate partner of ours and a great corporate citizen in the state of New Jersey. They have been for years, they still are. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you Henry Reese, the Manager, Commercial Lines Premium Audit at NJM Insurance. Henry?
Thank you, Tom. NJM Insurance is pleased to be the exclusive sponsor of the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce's Small Business Webinar Series. This morning's webinar is a wide-ranging one, where our panelists will discuss steps your business should take to protect data. I want to thank the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce for the opportunity to briefly speak with you today. The New Jersey Chamber has been an essential voice for the Garden State businesses for more than a century, and a vocal advocate in the corridors of the capital of Trenton. NJM has been helping small businesses meet their insurance needs since 1913. We've been the largest writer of workers' compensation insurance in New Jersey for more than 75 years. We're also a leading provider of commercial auto insurance. We wrote those two, and only those two, lines of businesses for the better part of a century. However, we've added new products to better serve our policyholders and potential new customers. We've expanded our footprint at the same time. NJM is now a leading regional insurer, serving business customers in Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, and of course, New Jersey. Our NJM Pro Edge Business Owners policy combines protection for common property and liability risk for smaller businesses. The NJM Pro Pack Commercial Package policy protects mid to large size businesses against property and liability risk. NJM business policyholders receive the highest level of service, including access to nationally recognized claim service and certified loss prevention specialists. This focus on safety, along an NJM hallmark, helps business owners identify and correct workplace hazards before accidents occur. And if an injury should happen, our claims and medical service professionals work to mitigate losses and contain claims cost. We take pride in aligning the right coverages for our policyholders, providing an outstanding customer experience, and sharing profits in the form of dividends. We want to help our policyholders grow, and in turn grow with them. If you're not an NJM business customer, I encourage you to visit njm.com to review our agent directory, get a free quote, or contact us with any questions. Thank you. Now, let's get to the program. Tom, Kai, Michelle, and Will have some important and valuable information to share this morning on data protection. It is my pleasure to turn the proceedings over to Tom Bracken, who will serve as our moderator.
Thank you, Henry. And again, thank you to NJM Insurance Group for your sponsorship of these webinars. So to begin, as Henry said, we have 4 experts who will be our panel today. I will moderate. I would be remiss if I didn't say that I know nothing about what these 4 people will be talking about. I'm strictly going to be the gatekeeper for this, and I will prompt them to give you as much information on protecting customer data as they can in the next hour. So to begin, let's just have each of the panelists give the audience a little bit of their background. And Kai, what you want to start, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, Tom. So my name is Kai Pfiester. I'm the founder and CEO of Protexity, which is a New Jersey-based cybersecurity consulting company. My background is in offensive security. For the lay people, that means that we leverage simulated attacks to help organizations validate that their security controls are indeed working. And I specialize in helping organizations identify and close security gaps that put them at risk of cyber attack or failing to meet regulatory compliance.
Okay, thank you. How about Michelle?
Good morning, everybody. And Kai and I have actually worked together with clients who are either being proactive, and we encourage you all to be proactive, or clients who are being reactive. I handle the legal side of these issues. I am with CSG Law, and I lead their tech, privacy, and data innovations practice group. What that means is that I work with clients to help them understand the regulatory and statutory landscape to which they are subject. And New Jersey does finally have a proactive piece of privacy law on the books. I also review contracts with our clients, and I do the non-technical risk assessment with our clients for them to understand what data they have and where they may be vulnerable. I also work with them on incident preparedness, doing tabletop exercise. And if God forbid they do have an issue, I am the voice of calm in the midst of the storm. Finally, please never use the B word. Don't say breach, say incident until proven otherwise. Thank you for having me this morning.
Thank you for being here, Michelle. Will.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to meet everyone this morning. My name is Will Schaap. I am CIO of Riverstrong. Riverstrong is a managed service provider and a managed cybersecurity provider. We're your IT consultants, outsourced IT for all aspects of your technology infrastructure and services. We help our clients risk assess their situation to identify, protect, and recover from incidents that Michelle had just mentioned that Kai is going over. We are based out of Red Bank, New Jersey, and work with customers of all sizes, majority around small businesses, to protect their data, protect their users, and protect their landscape from all the threats that we're going to speak of today.
Thank you, Will. Tom?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Gregory. I work for TD Bank, and I manage an organization that deals with businesses, institutions of all sizes, and their payment needs. And so while I'm not an IT specialist or a data scientist, I have dealt directly with countless organizations in every sector of all size, in every geography. Number one, evangelizing a message, but sadly, number two, dealing with them as they go through the stages of grief and loss after they've been a victim of a fraud, whether it's cyber related or just out and out check fraud. My message is simple. If your organization, and it's possible that they are, is doing everything it needs to do with people like Kai and Will and Michelle to protect data, to protect assets, it's not enough. The human firewall is critical, and the human firewall is every employee in the company that goes through their days with a risk-mindedness. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that later on. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, let me start with a very broad 30,000-foot question that we can hopefully drill down on as we go through the next hour. If you are a business that is collecting data from your customers, what do you need to consider with regard to the risk in collecting that data? So, Kai, you want to kick that one off?
Sure, Tom. So first off, I'm a big believer in reducing your footprint, right? So if you can not collect something, that's the direction you want to move in, right? Because they can't steal, they can't ransom what you don't have, right? So that's the first thing that I would mark on. Second is when it comes to managed service providers or anyone else in the company, ensure that there's adequate backups, right? Super important as far as like ransomware or any of other kinds of disasters are concerned. But I'm going to pass this on to Michelle because I think this is more of a legal question.
Okay, Michelle, you want to take that, please?
Yes, thank you. And first of all, I would absolutely echo what Kai just said. Less is more. And I'm sure that all of us have war stories to share, but I will tell you that I'm actually dealing with, unfortunately, the B word does apply, a breach right now for a small businessman who has data going back from the day that he opened his doors. We're talking more than 10 years ago, including information about clients that he didn't take on. So think about the ramifications there. First of all, he's got a breach notice obligation to multiple states because he had contacts with people in 17 different states. On top of that, that data was unencrypted. And he's now reaching out to not only current clients, but former clients and clients that he declined. So think about how that message is being received by those individuals. It's insult injury. You didn't take me on and you kept my data. And now you've been breached. And I'm supposed to say, gee, so sorry these things happen. So number one, less is more. And I know salespeople like to keep data. Doesn't mean it's appropriate to keep data about somebody who was a prospect 20 years ago. Get rid of it. And if you do need to keep data statutorily, for example, with regard to employment records or litigation records, not everything needs to be kept online. So keep it offline. The other thing that small business owners don't think about is a lot of their equipment is leased, not owned. When you're returning that equipment, that stored data, who's wiping that information? And it may not be the leasing company. Even when you're traveling, when you go to sync up your phone with a rental car, please don't do it. You're just feeding data into a vehicle that you don't own or you don't control. These are things that we need to think about. And going back to the regulatory landscape, in New Jersey, you're talking about a privacy law that applies to businesses that process or control more than 100,000 consumers. That may not apply to a lot of our listeners today. However, New York's proactive cybersecurity law doesn't have a numbers threshold. So if you have the information about one individual in the state of New York, you need to be proactive. And if you're doing business with folks in California, even if it's business-related information, that information has to be protected if you're subject to the California Consumer Privacy Act. So there's a lot to think about here, and you can't just say, oh, I'm a small business owner, I'm not a target.
Hey,
Could I just
go ahead.
just wanted to add the references Kai and Michelle are making to less is more. Sometimes we call that the principle of least privilege. And so I like the idea where only collect what you need, because if you have something that you don't need, it could make you vulnerable in an incident. But once you have it, only allow access to what is essential to every user. You may need to collect 18 data elements, but a given user in your company may only need to see 9 of them in order to do their job. Think about what your employees can look at with payroll. The payroll manager can see certain things. The IT manager can see certain other things. Think about the vendor master file. So this whole idea of collecting only what you need and granting the principle of least privilege.
Will, anything to add to all this?
That is absolutely the way to go, the principle of least privilege, so you can reduce the risk that would be exposed. But one of the first things that what ingesting data for your business is a necessity that we all know that and need to process. But most people do not understand or identify what data, where they sit, who needs what data, where does it reside, and what happens to it when people use it. So I would ask everyone to ask themselves in each of your department heads what data they actually need to run the business, where it resides, what happens if it does get breached. Bad word here, Michelle, sorry, but what happens if it does get breached, and how do you recover? What is the action plan if and when that does happen? There's a lot of misconceptions around we're too small to be targeted. I don't think that's the case anymore because these targets are automatic. They don't care the size, who they are, where you sit, where you reside. These are automatic attacks. And when they see a breach, so that path no longer is valid around we're too small to be breached or target. And we do assist small businesses of all sizes currently who are getting breached in various ways. And that's the conversation I hear back all the time. Like, I can't believe this happened to us. Why would someone want to do that to us? Well, it's no longer about you or us. It's just, you're just a target because you were vulnerable.
So I hear all of you. I heard the phrase less is more made several times. My experience is if you go to a new doctor, if you want to get a new credit card, if you want to apply for a membership in a club, the amount of information that people are asking you for is pages and pages long. And it's to the point where several times I've just given up and said, I'm not doing this. So you talk about less is more, but my feeling is in practice, people are asking for more. Am I wrong with that perception?
Data is king these days, right? Everyone wants more data, more inputs, more data points to take action to either win your business or lose your business, right? So that is a practice that I do see more, and we're all guilty of it. We want more input, more data to help us analyze the situation. And that really goes back to what I was saying before, is that you need to identify what happens to this data and how do you act and properly manage the data. There's a concept what we do, it's called business impact assessment, and where you go through each department head and you would go identify what are all the critical, crucial technology, services, resources that your department or business needs to operate. Once you identify that on paper, it's a good chance that you'll see things that you never thought of before, which then you can take action to further protect.
So with the concept of less is more, what essential data is needed for companies to collect? I mean, is there a finite amount that they should get, and beyond that, they should not reach for more data to protect themselves? Is that a concept that people should embrace?
I think Michelle is very well handled to answer this question, so I'll pass it over to her.
So I'm going to sound like a lawyer and say it depends. So, Tom, to your point of companies asking you for data, when you go to pick up a prescription at CVS, they ask you, what's your birthday? And I cannot tell you how many people just spit out date, month, and year without even thinking. And for people like me who practice in this space and who are nosy and pay attention to these things, suddenly now I know when Tom's birthday is. And no disrespect, Tom, I'm not going to send you a birthday card. But if I'm a bad actor, I now have at least 2 data points about you, your name and your birth date. CVS only needs month and date. Now, for those of us who are competitive, I'm a runner. And at my age, I tend to medal because there just aren't that many women in my age category who are running. But again, when I register for a race, they only need to know a given year in which I'm born. They don't need my actual birthday. So feel free to send me a birthday card on January 1st. It's not my birthday, but as far as these various races that I enter, that's when I was born. Because you don't need to give out certain information. My eye doctor wanted to record my credit card so it would make their lives easier. My response was, I'm not here to make your life easier. I'm here to pay for this visit. You don't need to keep my credit card on file. So we as individuals should think about, in the first instance, what are we giving over and why? But then as far as the businesses are concerned, and I go back to what Will was saying, is that this really is a team sport, and you need to have all of your departments involved. Salespeople love data. They want as much information as possible. So I want to know, Tom, when's your birthday? When are your kids' birthdays? When's your anniversary? What's your favorite food? And so on and so forth. So when we speak to each other next, I can say, hey, Tom, how's your son doing? Did he get into this school?
Right.
And I sent you a cheesecake and what have you. All of that data, that's personal information. And if somebody were then to compromise my sales system, now I've got a profile about Tom Brackett or Tom Gregory or whomever else's information that's been put in that database. And let's assume that there's a legitimate reason for the sales guys to have that data. Again, going back to Will and Tom's point, there's no reason that the finance people should have access to that information. And again, if Tom and Will said, you know what, Michelle, it's been real, it's been nice, but no, we're not engaging with you. Maybe I come back to them a year later, maybe I don't. 5 years later, no, that data should no longer be in my environment. And when we think about healthcare providers, obviously they do need to keep certain information on record to give you effective healthcare, but they need to think about where that data is stored, who is processing. And we could also then get into supply chain risk, which is built into HIPAA with the requirement for business associate agreements. It's also built into Tom Gregory's world. Banking regulations require banking institutions to vet their vendors. But the average business person doesn't think about that. And supply chain risk accounts for an enormous number of breaches.
Anybody else like to comment on that? No? So a question then, as a corollary to that comment, the information that you do collect, how long do you need to store that data? Once let's say the customer is no longer a customer, do you need to keep that information on file? And if so, for how long?
Well, Tom, go ahead.
Well, now I'm going to sound like a lawyer and say it depends. And depending upon your industry, there will be regulatory requirements to store things. There may be statutory requirements, depending upon what industry that you compete in. I'm a bank. We process checks. We destroy them immediately, and then we hold on to them for at least 7 years. And so much of this is dictated by statute or by regulation. But if not, there should be, again, it's kind of along the same lines of principle of least privilege. If you no longer need it, then get rid of it. And this is something that is so easy to neglect because data storage is so inexpensive and so massive that unless your company has an iterative rhythm to cleaning up data, to purging data, to culling files, it can become, in essence, a hoarder. And that information, if you have it, then it makes you more vulnerable if there is an incident. If you don't have it, I mean, Kai started this whole program out by saying, if it doesn't exist, it can't hurt you. But I also think that this is an area that needs formal accountability in organizations, whether you're a Fortune 500 organization or you're a company with 3 employees. Somebody has to be in charge. Somebody has to be named the superintendent of risk so that we know that, so everybody knows we're taking care of these issues. We visit these things on some cycle. And that in and of itself, a little bit of governance can go a long way.
So obviously, organizations have many different ways to try to get data that you all are, the companies are storing. So, Kai, I guess your company tries to simulate attacks to prevent to alert people to that kind of an attempt. What kind of simulated events do you perform to try to educate people on that topic?
Yeah, so thank you. So the most common term that many people hear a lot is penetration testing, right? This is very, very important to do depending on the level of maturity, right, of an organization, because there are essentially two groups that move the ball of security forward. It is criminals, right? So an event happens, right? And then people say, okay, how can we stop this from occurring in the future? And they evolve security, principles and techniques and strategies. Simulated attacks move the ball forward as well without the harm. And that is why they are so important, because during a real attack, you have the fog of war, you have hostile intentions, hostile parties, right? So in that situation, it's very difficult, as Michelle can attest. During a breach, any kind of security incident, it's scary. If there's no tabletop exercises, people make mistakes. So the simulated attacks allow you to see where your company would fare if it was actually targeted. In ways, there's all kinds of attacks, but they typically fall into two categories, which is interaction and interactionless. So phishing, for example, requires user interaction, right? So we're all talking about the importance of users being educated, and Tom Gregory was talking about the human firewall. When that malicious email ends up in the inbox, it's inert. It can't do anything. There's language in that email that's trying to get someone to take action, to interact with it, either by opening the attachment or clicking on a link that leads to a login page. Those are the kinds of things that we do. We test people. But there's also what are called interaction lists that do not require any kind of involvement with the staff, right? And so when systems are vulnerable, right, those systems are sitting either on the company's network perimeter, right? When you have to log into a service, right, could be your email. Those are things that do not require user interaction. Those are the kinds of things that we test as well.
So I would assume that two things. One is that you need to educate the staff on the potential for these kinds of attacks. And then you need to have simulated attacks to see if it's working within the company. Is that right?
It is. There's a lot of discussion, right, in the higher circles of cybersecurity. And some people, their position is that security awareness training is a failure, right? Because if you have 100 staff and you get that number, you do your phishing awareness and it gets down to 1%, whether 100 people click on it or one is still 100% compromise, right? So people tend to feel that really technology should be there. It's the technology that's failing, not the users. You can't expect, someone whose sole focus is, biotechnology, to have the vision and the perspective, right, to identify some of the most sophisticated phishing techniques. I mean, if the timing and the language and the context is right, I almost fell for one, right? I just did a presentation down in Atlantic City. I had some people call me up and tell me that my hotel reservation didn't go through. And I'm like, what? Oh, okay. And then they start saying, well, what day you're going to be there. And then I was like, hold up. This is a scam. But they got me, they had enough information to create that context that was believable. And I started going along, but then, my spidey sense went off after a bit. And then I was like, no, I have that. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's difficult, and I will leave it there for others to.
Michelle, you want to do weigh in?
So Verizon's 2024 report just came out, and a stat that jumped out at me was that 87% of incidents have a human error factor. as part of the incident. Think about that, 87%. So to Kai's point, training is critical. And by the way, a lot of statutory frameworks require you to train your personnel. The other thing is that you should have written policies and procedures. As Tom knows from his world in banking, you've got all sorts of issues with wire fraud these days. You should be training your personnel that if you receive an email that says Will has changed his banking information, somebody needs to pick up the phone, call Will's known phone number and say, hey, Will, are you now banking with a bank in Timbuktu? That should raise red flags for somebody. And if you don't take the time to train your personnel, if you don't have written policies and procedures that speak to that, then you're not taking those reasonable measures that are required by laws across the country, whether it's privacy laws or cybersecurity laws or statutory frameworks that are industry specific.
Could I?
Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
I want to weigh in with some kind of layman's terms. So first of all, I think that a constant layering on of controls, preventative, detective kinds of things, more is better. It's the opposite of the principle of least privilege. So Kai, we need to continue with the technology stopgaps, and we also need to continue with training, and training that comes with testing. I'll get an email from time to time that I will say, this one looks suspicious. And then I'll immediately come back and say, good job by you. That was a test. My organization invests a lot in this. But think about a small business. They hire a new employee. Young person doesn't know anything. Got to hire that. You got to train that person in how to do their job, how to drive the forklift, how to engage customers at the deli counter, whatever it is. And we want them to do their jobs well so that we can improve the wealth of the owners. We want them to serve customers and make service part of their DNA. Being suspicious and validating and finding red flags also needs to be part of the training and part of the DNA of every business. Michelle was talking about business email compromise, where there's no technology can really help here. I get a call. It sounds exactly like Joe from my supplier. Joe says shipment's going to be delayed this month. Okay, Joe, I understand. Joe calls back again. Guess what? Things changed. Shipment's going to be on time. Thanks, Joe. It's a normal and customary exchange. It's not Joe. It's AI. Sounds just like Joe. And then Joe says, we changed banks. I had enough with their fees. We have a new account. Could you update your vendor master? All right, update the vendor master, and then the next payment to Joe goes to a criminal's account. And to Michelle's point, we need to train our people. Don't ever change an account number without authenticating that we're supposed to do that. Call the number that you know to be Joe's number and say, Joe, did you really ask me to do this? I can't tell you the number of incidents where companies, educated people, financial executives are falling for that social engineering. They're being duped. It may happen through an email exchange. It may happen through a phone call. And it really simply is the old Ronald Reagan, trust but validate. And as we often say to people almost cynically, pick up the dang phone.
So,
By the
Will,
way, Michelle, I fancy carrot cake.
Will, looked like you were anxious to say something.
I was. So I completely agree with the folks here that the human aspect is always the trigger for the most part. Michelle mentioned 87%, and I completely believe that's true. But as IT professionals, what we should be doing is making sure that we know what's happening within our environment. So the user does fall for phishing, happens every day. The computer gets compromised and someone installs a VPN and remotely accessing your computer, which then further takes action against all the things that we're talking about. It's going to end up in really bad situation for you and your data. However, from an IT perspective, we should be watching and monitoring. We should know that a strange, suspicious VPN was established across a computer in your network. Then you start questioning why. And it goes back to that conversation. Hi, Michelle, did you launch something? Because we see something happening here. It looks strange and malicious. Let's just validate that's a legitimate business reason or use. There's also ways to prevent even that VPN from establishing, which is perhaps a newer technology, zero trust, right? We implement zero trust across your environment. So by default, we no longer trust applications that are running, but we create whitelists to make sure that applications that are running are something that we want to run in our environment. So there are technology ways to watch and manage and monitor and protect and ensure that data and access is protected. There is no real way besides the training aspect of it to prevent a human from clicking on that phishing that looks so legitimate and real. But that's not an excuse for not protecting your environment with technologies that can tell us when you've been hacked, vulnerable, or where the risks lie within your environment.
Anyone else like to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention about phone calls, right? So phone fraud, right? All these scams that are originating from the phone are skyrocketing. And so one thing that people should be aware of is when you are going to validate someone, call them. Do not email them and say, call me, because it is, unless you're like a 3-letter agency, you're not going to be able to spoof receiving a phone call. But there are apps. You can go into the App Store for Google or Apple, and you can download an app. One of them is called Spoof Card, and you can put in the receiving number, right? Or the number that you want to pretend to be. It could be the IRS, could be whoever, could be a spouse. And then you put in who you want to target. And there's voice changing capabilities. There's all these kinds of, weaponized technologies that people are using to commit these crimes. So it's very, very important to pick up the phone and call a known number. The other thing to understand is with business email compromise is when they get into your email, they go and read all of the previous conversations so they can understand the context and the relationship, and then develop their strategy and who they're going to talk to. So when you say how do these people find me, a lot of times they share contact lists that they get from compromised email accounts, and then it just spreads from there.
So if a breach happened, I'm sorry, Michelle, I used the term breach, and you didn't want me to do that, but if something happens, what is the first step that should be taken by the company owner or the manager? Do you go to law enforcement? How do you start the process to try to rectify what's happened?
Well, again, I'm going to sound like a lawyer and say that it depends. So if you're a company the size of mine or larger, and we have an internal CIO, a chief information officer, we have a whole team inside, they can do the initial triage. When you're dealing with small business owners, and oftentimes I am dealing with small business owners that have been compromised, they don't have those internal resources. So that before the proverbial hits the fan, small business owners should think about who would be my resources. And this goes back to the planning. Who is my outside cyber counsel? Do I have cyber insurance? Who is my outside IT resource? Who could I call for forensic resources? I mean, you think about it, and I apologize for the guys on the call, but if you're a woman and you're giving birth, you don't want to meet your OBGYN the day that you're having the baby. You should not be doing these types of plans before the incident occurs. So you should know in advance, who are you going to call? Now, I will tell you, coming from the legal perspective, I would recommend that you engage with all these folks through counsel so you can endeavor to have protection by attorney-client privilege when Kai or Will gives you the report that says, this is what happened. The other advantage of engaging through counsel is let's suppose if, God forbid, you're hit by ransomware. I have connections at the FBI. So I can pick up the phone and call the FBI agents that I know and say, hey, guys, can you tell me how Play acts? And Play is one of the ransom gangs that's out there that's very active these days. And Play will put your data onto the dark web if you don't pay. That is their MO, period, end of discussion. Having those insights from law enforcement is very helpful in determining how you want to respond. But a business owner often will say, yeah, I don't want to reach out to law enforcement just yet. If you do it through counsel, counsel can do it on a no-names basis. I will tell you, however, that if you have a breach that involves individuals' information, depending upon the jurisdiction where those individuals reside and how many people you're talking about, you do have to report to law enforcement ultimately, whether it's to the New Jersey State Cyber Unit or the New York State. There are 3 different organizations that you have to report to, 4 if it involves more than 500 individual New York residents, and so on. So to your point, Tom, what do you do first? You want to bring in folks like Kai or Will to understand what happened. How do you close the back door? How do you make sure the bad actors aren't still in there? And also being proactive and thinking about, okay, I've had this compromise. What do I need to do to continue to operate? Do I have backups? Are those backups good? Can I put that backup data, which is clean data, onto my computers, or have the computers been compromised to the point that I need new computers? And all of this has to happen concurrently, which is why it's critical to have a plan in advance. As these guys have already said, the day that you have the compromise isn't the day to say, okay, what am I going to do? The other thing that we should keep in mind, particularly when you're talking about the human error factor, is these things often happen on a holiday weekend. We've got 4th of July coming up. I can't tell you how many clients I've heard from on the Monday following a holiday weekend saying, we had this weird thing happen on Friday and we just shut down our systems, but we want to talk about it now. You can't wait. And you need to make sure that your employees know how to report. So for our office, everybody has a little handy dandy 4x6 card that's our incident response card. Think about it as the PTA calling tree for those of us who are old enough to remember what those are. And on a holiday Friday, New Year's Eve, whatever, if somebody clicks on something, or if somebody sees something that's funky, or if somebody's computer just shuts down on them, they know who to call. They know where to reach them. And it's not just business contact information, it's personal contact information. Because if you're like our office and you have Zoom phones and what have you, and you have obviously corporate email, well, if our systems are locked up, I can't use the corporate phone numbers. I can't use the corporate email address. So I need to have Kai's cell phone number. I need to have Tom's home email address so that I can get my team moving and not losing pace because our systems are shut down.
Tom?
Everything Michelle just said, I think, are pearls. Everything. The whole thing about before the holiday weekend, getting to law enforcement, preferably through legal counsel, all good stuff. Thank you. I tell business and corporations when it happens, 3 things: get to law enforcement. If it's a payment related thing, get to your bank.
Yeah.
It may be a low probability proposition, but if you act fast enough, we may be able to intercept the money, depending upon what type of payment, the terms, whether it's ACH or Zelle or wire, etc. And number 3, lodge your incident on the website ic3.gov. It stands for Internet Crime Complaint Center. And so when you log your incident, it helps law enforcement to get another puzzle piece, because they too are putting together pieces of the puzzle to find the criminals. The other thing that ic3.gov provides is a lot of educational materials. So if you want to know more about kind of the the emerging threats that the government is seeing, go out and nose around on ic3.gov.
So it's obvious that there are numerous threats, numerous ramifications. So the question is, and somebody mentioned this during the conversation, cyber insurance. Is there cyber insurance available? And is it affordable? And what does it cover?
I will jump in here and say you get what you pay for. So one of the breaches that Kai and I worked on together involved a small CPA firm, 4 full-time employees, 4 part-time employees. And the first question I asked him when he contacted me was, do you have cyber insurance? His response was, I think so. What it was a slap on to his professional liability coverage that had a total of $50,000 in coverage with a $25,000 deductible. It was useless, truly useless. You want to understand when you're looking at cyber insurance, does it cover first-party claims? Does it cover third-party claims? Does it cover ransom payments? Will it cover you to manage litigation, regulatory fines? Does it cover you internationally if you have international data? You also want to understand not only dollar deductibles, but time deductibles. And when I say time deductibles, a lot of the damage that happens with a breach happens in the first 24 hours. But some cyber policies have a time deductible, meaning that they won't cover losses that happen in the first 8 hours. I also mentioned earlier the issue with supply chain. So let's suppose it's not you that was the point of compromise, but your third-party provider. If that third-party provider goes down, think about this as the cyber equivalent of a superstorm Sandy. You have business storm interruption for weather events. Do you have business insurance coverage for a cyber event? And then Tom was also talking about wire fraud. You've got cyber insurance, but you've also got crime coverage. Cyber insurance will not cover you if you've got an employee who clicks on a link and voluntarily gives out information. A crime coverage policy might cover you for those losses. And what you really need to have is a knowledgeable cyber insurance broker. You want to make sure you're not getting the broker who slaps on that $50,000 policy that really isn't useful. And then, of course, make sure that your third-party vendors who are managing your data for you, that they have cyber insurance as well.
So if these policies are affordable, I am sure that the insurance provider places requirements on the company to validate the coverage. What are the kinds of requirements they place on companies?
I don't want to monopolize this conversation. So if somebody else wants to jump in here.
I'll chime in real quick. So I've seen where, without getting too technical, Active Directory, for example, in a company, right? It's a centralized way of managing all of the employees, right? And all of the computers from a centralized location. When attackers get into environments, and at least the ransomware, usually they have compromised what is called Active Directory. Now, some providers out there, technology providers, are working with insurance companies to assess Active Directory, and they give a report back to insurance prior to them granting coverage. And so they'll look at that and make the determination based on there. So not all providers do this, but I know some do. And, depending on who you're getting your insurance from, they may require that kind of an assessment.
Yeah. And I think also the insurance company wants to make sure that the insured are doing their part. And so they'll expect there to be basic hygiene that's carried out by the employees of the company. And that could include attesting to annual training and other things.
And needless to say, if you misrepresent what you have in place, you've just given your carrier a reason to deny coverage.
Will, you have a comment?
This is one of the topics that we help our customers with. While I'm not an insurance agent, of course, we do help our small businesses provide the services or coverage or services such as Kai's penetration testing. There are different monitoring services or training services that are happening that you can implement that we do help our customers put into place and work with insurance companies to reduce their premiums back to the requirements and the checklists of acquiring insurance and at what level and what coverage. So we do help our customers implement these tools, which can help them reduce their premiums and apply for further coverage.
If a company has a breach, sorry, Michelle, and data is obtained by some third-party criminal, what are the potential fines or legal ramifications associated with it if they don't have insurance, or if they do have insurance?
Well, regardless of insurance, and the insurance may or may not cover these types of issues, you're talking about a number of potential areas of exposure, depending upon what industry you're in, what jurisdiction you're located, how many people are compromised, and whether you had plans and programs in place. So by way of example, Massachusetts has had a law in its books going back to 2004, which requires businesses that are processing information about Massachusetts residents to have a written information security program. And it also requires you to report if you have an event that compromises the information about individuals who are residents of Massachusetts. If that compromise includes name plus social security number, name plus credit card information, name plus bank account and access credentials that account or what have you, you're then required to provide 2 years of credit monitoring services to each of those individuals. If you don't have a written information security program and you have an event, you are subject to regulatory fines in the state of Massachusetts. In New Jersey, now that we have a proactive law on the books, again, if business owners are not taking reasonable measures to protect the information they are processing, they're not only going to be incurring costs to deal with providing credit monitoring services, although not required by New Jersey law yet. If you're giving it to one employee who's located in Massachusetts and your employees in New Jersey aren't being provided that credit monitoring services, they're not going to be happy campers. If you're a healthcare provider and you're subject to HIPAA and you have a breach and you have not been proactive, not only will you probably be monitored and audited for the next several years, but again, you are subject to fines. And if you want to get extreme, look at the fines that are imposed under the European Union or the UK GDPR. Those fines, if you have not been proactive or if you've been grossly negligent, you could be looking at fines upwards of 4% or 20 million euro. Think about that. 4% of your annual revenues. That's an enormous number. And by the way, a lot of these privacy laws are now providing a private cause of action. So you're not just getting fined by the attorney general of a particular state. You now have those lovely massive class action breaches that we're reading about all the time. And even without that private cause of action, I can assure you there's very active proactive plaintiff bars across the country who are looking for these breaches to sue.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. We have a few minutes left. So let me try to summarize my perception of our overall conversation and then ask each of you to comment on what I'm about to say. First of all, less is more, which is the need to, the desire to get information. Less is more. That's always a good philosophy to have. Secondly, make sure you educate all of your employees as to the risks involved. Thirdly, to Kai's point, do testing and simulate breaches. Sorry, Michelle, again. Simulate attacks so that you can find out if education is working. And then finally, prepare for the case that an incident does happen so that you know what to do and how to mitigate and stop any further damage than what has already taken place. So more is less, less is more, educate, test, and prepare. Does that kind of give an overview of what we've talked about today? Will, you want to kick it off?
The only thing I would add is what you want more of is support and services around these things, around who to talk to. So the only thing I would walk away with at this point is to ask questions, start the conversation around how and what's going on within your organization, who would help you in this event, in this situation, what are the legal ramifications. So bring the resources around near you and have them ready for action when these things do occur, if it happens to occur.
Okay, Kai?
I would agree. I would add that assessments are very, very important, right? Just like in healthcare, in our own personal lives, you know, we go to the doctor and the doctor asks us basic questions, our height, you know, our weight, you know, all this bio data, and then says, okay, well, based on this is what I should be seeing, right? As far as your weight, as far as your blood pressure and all of these things. And if they don't align with what they say is healthy for us, we need to make changes. And the same thing goes with the company cybersecurity. You need that assessment to baseline where you are as opposed to where you need to be. And then you close those gaps to reduce your security risk. So that's the thing that I would stress is getting those initial assessments or assessments every year.
Tom?
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a doom and gloom, but I do think that everyone needs to understand that bad things don't happen to other people. They happen to us, and we should assume that our companies are being surveilled. The point was made earlier. This isn't somebody in their garage looking at a phone book. Okay, there are bots all over the world searching for weak spots.
Yeah.
And so assume that your company is already a target that will be hit unless you take action. And then the second thing is, this really is a team sport. Sometimes we talk about fraudsters like they're cute little things that live under the bridge. No, they're not. They're evil criminals. Pick a side, join the army of those of us that want to ameliorate this terrible thing that's happening in society.
Okay, we have 30 seconds. Michelle, wrap it up.
First of all, guys, please take a look at the chat. I threw in 3 different free resources. Now that you've heard us speaking about this and you're ready to drink the Kool-Aid, these can give you roadmaps as to how to be proactive and how to react, God forbid the event happens. Train your personnel, patch your systems, identify your data, assess your vulnerabilities, monitor your environment, be prepared to respond, and then make sure you have backup data and clean systems onto which you can load up that data if, God forbid, the event happens.
So Tom, Kai, Michelle, Will, great insight into this very important topic. My feeling is we probably just hit the tip of the iceberg on this. It's way beyond what we talked about, but it was a good hour. I appreciate, and so do our listeners appreciate everything you've told us. Thank you very much. Our next webinar will be in the fall. We'll take the summer off. And I just want to remind everybody that the biggest event we have at the Chamber, and one of the biggest events in New Jersey, is our old train trip, the Walk to Washington, which is coming back next year, February 6th and 7th. Please look at our website and find out about it. It's going to be a huge event with many gubernatorial candidates on the train. So again, hopefully you'll all participate in that. But again, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to the listeners. Thank you to NJM Insurance Group. Appreciate everything and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.